California, we're zeroing in on hospice fraud. And hospice is like the program everyone in America supports. That's, at the end of your life, when hospice comes in to take care of you and your family in your deepest, darkest days. This program has been massively defrauded in California, specifically in Los Angeles County, to the tune of about $3.5 billion. That's just in one county in California, the fraud. So we're going to try to do what we can to help the Department of Justice get on the ground there and start prosecuting actual people for defrauding hospice. And I'm sure there are a host of other social programs. All of your social programs in these blue states are being defrauded. You've got illegals receiving benefits. You've got duplicate names receiving benefits. You have shyster contractors, like what you saw with the Somali fraud, with the Leering Center and all of that stuff. Those are the people that need to be prosecuted. All we can do in Congress, all I can do as chairman of the House Oversight Committee, all Jim Jordan can do as chairman of the Judiciary Committee is investigate and refer to the Department of Justice. So I take a lot of flack because nobody's been arrested. I remind everyone that's the Attorney General's job. That's in the Trump administration. But we're doing everything we can in Congress to help the Department of Justice be successful. And I think we're seeing success in Minnesota. Now, I'd like to see a whole lot more success everywhere else.
So you said last night that Gavin Newsom better lawyer up. How much of this do you think goes back to the governor's desk, Mr. Chairman?
Because there have been audits for several years that have specifically pointed to hospice fraud in Los Angeles County, yet Gavin Newsom did nothing about it. There were no guardrails. I'll give you an example. There are no guardrails to prevent a foreign country from claiming they're performing hospice duties in Los Angeles County and billing the government. 18% of all the hospice billing in America was in Los Angeles County. That's the level of fraud. That's not 18% of the population. That's not even 1% of the population. And it's just an example of where anyone that with any common sense, that cared anything about the American taxpayer, that cared anything about preventing fraud, could see that this was a problem, not only in California, but specifically in Los Angeles County. And yet he did nothing about it until now. We've announced the investigation. Well, he's announced he's putting additional guardrails on, and he's fired, several dozen contractors that were defrauding hospice and all that. Where have you been, Governor Newsom? And that's what we found in Minnesota. Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison knew about this, even when they were confronted by state employees. So what we hope happens in California is what we had happen in Minnesota, where we have brave whistleblowers come forward for a congressional investigation to be successful. Because we're not the FBI. We don't have the ability to bust through the door and apprehend anyone or get documents other than through subpoena. What we have to be successful are whistleblowers, credible whistleblowers. We know there's a whistleblower in California that made some accusations years ago that turned out to be 100% true about the fraud in California. We hope that whistleblower will reach out to me and we can get them in an interview under oath to begin the process of bringing in Gavin Newsom.
So you are looking right now for and potentially have whistleblowers from inside of the fraud super system of California, and you are then going to be leveraging that against the governor's stewardship of the state.
Yeah, and I hope they see what we did in Minnesota. We protected those whistleblowers. They were not harassed. They were treated. We gave them whistleblower protection status. We worked with, we made it clear that Minnesota could not retaliate against those whistleblowers. And everything we did was right in how you deal with whistleblowers blowing the whistle on a major fraud scheme. Because it takes guts to step forward and blow the whistle on massive fraud, especially if you're a career government employee. So we hope that what we demonstrated in Minnesota with the respect to those whistleblowers will bleed over into California and Illinois and New York and all the other states where we know there's rampant fraud.
Do you currently have whistleblowers right now from the state of California?
We have some targets that we're trying to encourage to come in. And, you have to build that trust level. And I think one thing the Democrats have done, you go back to the Biden investigation where you had Gary Shapley and Joseph Ziegler, and they harassed those whistleblowers. Democrats love whistleblowers that blow the whistle on Donald Trump, but they don't want whistleblowers to blow the whistle on any of their shenanigans and schemes. And we're trying to set the example on the oversight committee, the way we treated those whistleblowers in Minnesota. I hope that leads to more whistleblowers coming forward. And, sometimes whistleblowers blow the whistle and they're not telling the truth, or what they think is happening isn't happening. We made sure we vetted everything, and 100% of what we published in our report on Minnesota was factual, based on hours and hours and hours of transcribed interviews and hours of steady research.
What type of culpability is there, since you've, I believe, completed, or at the very least contributed a report on Minnesota? What type of culpability would there be for the Attorney General in Minnesota or for Tim Walz?
Well, honestly, I think the Attorney General has more liability. You can always plead ignorance, and ignorance usually prevails, unfortunately, in a lot of court cases in these liberal states with liberal judges. But you've got the recording that we've all heard of Ellison meeting with those Somali fraudsters saying, "Don't worry about it, I'll get them off your back," when they were nailed for fraud. And those fraudsters turned around and made a big campaign donation to Keith Ellison. That was played in our committee hearing, and this Senate had a committee hearing with Ellison. I can't remember which committee, but they played it. So that's something the Department of Justice could use to go after him. Walz is going to play the ignorance card, which he does very well. It's going to be hard to beat Walz in court playing the ignorant card. But you're seeing people go to prison in Minnesota for fraud, and that's what people want. I think with the big politicians, a realistic goal, when you say, what does accountability look like? Let the American people know. We let the American people know that Joe Biden's family was on the take, and a few months later, Joe Biden drops out of the presidential race. Now, there may have been other reasons, but that certainly didn't help. You go in Minnesota, when we started the investigation in Minnesota, Tim Walz dropped out of the governor's race. This is a guy that was just, a few million votes from being vice president of the United States, dropped out of the governor's race because of this fraud. Gavin Newsom is the front runner for the Democrat nomination in 2028. We'll see what happens here. And I think that we've got to, especially the people that watch this show are passionate about, going after the deep state and going after these corrupt politicians. We have to look at, what is achievable from a congressional standpoint, and shining the light on the corruption, letting the American people know how corrupt some of these politicians are. I think that's a pretty big win, because it's had an adverse effect on their electoral success. And we're not doing it for political reasons. We're doing it for the taxpayers. That's who I represent on the Oversight Committee, the American taxpayers. And the taxpayers are being fleeced. They're being fleeced in all 50 states, but they're really being fleeced in these blue states with these governors who look in the mirror and think they're a future president of the United States.